All right. Good to see everyone and be back on a stage. I haven't been a TechTO for many years. When I came here last, I was talking about my experience in Imagine K-12, which is part of Y Combinator right now. And we did a huge pivot, as Alex mentioned. We went from being a B2C physical product to being a B2B SaaS product. I won't talk about that today, but it was a big change. Since then, we've developed a learning platform that focuses on well-being and mental health in school systems, that supports literacy objectives, that helps collect data about how students are learning with gamified learning and personalized learning. And we are able to provide system-wide kind of sentiment data, progress data, learning data. And so it's really attractive to our school partners, districts, government partners, and so on. Let's see. So I'm going to talk about right before the pandemic and post-pandemic. So as you all know, during the pandemic, student mental health and well-being became top of mind concerns. And so we saw a pretty strong increase in demand and interest for our product. And during that time, we also saw that the government had put a lot of money, short-term money, into well-being and mental health. But what happened was a lot of competition came in, pricing pressure came in, as well as we saw that schools were becoming more and more concerned that this was a one-time kind of installment of funding. We also saw some early churn, not significant, but some early churn that gave us some pause that we said, okay, let's look at how we can diversify our revenue. A majority of our revenue, 95% of our revenue, was coming from the US at this point. And so we started looking at international partnerships and how we can diversify where our money was coming from. We looked at publishing partnerships. We worked with international consultants. And then we also looked at working with specifically a government. And we were invited by the Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Authority. So it was an entity in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi in the UAE who had a call for innovations globally. And we ended up applying. It seemed attractive in terms of the fact that you're invited by the government, and so a very credible way to enter the market. We saw strong demand and interest for well-being resources, and also there was non-dilutive funding to help support the transition. And so we found out 2 weeks prior to the program start that we were accepted, and we were being flown to Abu Dhabi for a month to learn all about the region and the opportunities. And so luckily, I took my 2-year-old and husband along, and we were put up at a beach resort in Abu Dhabi and learned all about the market. And we were really fortunate to connect with the local trade commissioners in Abu Dhabi to host local events, to connect with the private schools internationally from Canada. And quickly, we saw really strong appetite for what we were offering. The Canadian partners were fantastic in terms of letting us measure the impact of the program and collect some fantastic testimonials. And since then, I've gone 5 times in the last year and a half, and we have had just completed successful pilots with the government, so I'll show you some of the results from that, which is really exciting. We also did a ton of work in terms of translating, adapting, and learning about how we can successfully bring this to other regions, such as the Middle East. And we're forecasting about 50% of our revenue now will be coming from the UAE alone. And so I'll say, before I show you some of the pilot kind of results, the 3 things that we learned from this experience was, early on, when we see these kind of changes in the market, being able to adapt and learn, kind of investigate quickly about how we can explore ways. If we had waited when we, later on in the process, it would have been too late, or we would have missed this opportunity. The second area I'll mention is having a credible partner. So the fact that we came in with the government lent a ton of credibility going into a market like the UAE, where the government means a lot in terms of having approval, having the kind of authority to do work in the region. And then the last thing that I'll mention, the fact that we were really collaborative with our partners in terms of collecting data, understanding how we can adapt to the local market and needs, be it culturally or translations, but also how we collected data to showcase the impact of our work, I think really solidified the validation that we needed to be successful in the region. And so I'll show you some of the data that we just presented recently to one of the Abu Dhabi education authorities. We saw increases in gratitude, in being able to prioritize and planning, so stress around time management. Sorry. In terms of stress management, as well as we had glowing reviews from our student participants as well as the teachers. The students felt like it helped. They were really happy to have a resource they can turn to during stressful times. Teachers, we have this one tool called a check-in tool so that students can build self-awareness about their emotions and be able to share this data, not only with their teacher, but also collectively as a school. And so teachers felt like this helped students be able to build that self-awareness, be able to build a stronger community, and build relationships with herself. And then I love these 3 students. They sat with me and they talked about how it really was a stark change for them that they could actually turn to their classmates, they can confide in them, they can feel like they were in a safe and supportive environment. And this was only after an 8-week pilot, so it was really impressive to see this type of feedback. We also did, as I mentioned, a lot of adaptations, so looking at how we can make it more culturally appropriate. These are not the final ones, but we actually, for example, the girls had more modest clothing, we had translations, we had certain kind of adaptations that we got from our pilots. And then lastly, we also, as we are a K, all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade solution, we also adapted all our higher resources where we saw actually the need for Arabic was even stronger at that age. So that's it. I would love to take any questions. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn and stay in touch. And thank you so much for your time and attention.
So, questions? While we wait for the audience, it's Alex here. I have a first question for you. How did you go about knowing how to localize it? Because that sounds like a very difficult task.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we did a lot of pilots, and so we were really fortunate to have pilots where they would allow us to come into the classroom, observe classrooms in practice, but also connect with the specific Emirati teachers who would actually come in and look at all our content, tell us what types of stories or types of lessons they'd like to include in our content. And then as we went, we actually started building an advisory kind of team of local or Emirati educators who can then actually say, okay, yay or nay, does this make sense? Would this fit with the cultural norms? We also worked with, we also saw the specific guidelines that the local education authorities called out, and they were very specific about what is included or can't be included in their curriculum. So that helped.
Hey, two-part question. You mentioned you weren't going to talk about this, but what made you pivot from B2C to B2B? And in that pivot, what channel do you primarily use to get these clients? Like, for example, the Abu Dhabi client that you got.
Sorry, what was your second question?
So what primary channel, now that you're focused on B2B, what primary channel do you use to, I guess, gather more clients or more clientele?
All right, so the first question, B2C to B2B, it was a mix of opportunity. So when we were selling these little like physical play packs of educational materials. They were fantastic, kids loved them. We were growing, but I think one was a decision that, hey, we can grow faster and impact more children through digital, and B, we personally as founders hated the operational headache of dealing with a physical product. And so, and we didn't want to admit this for the longest time, but that was probably the biggest driver, that we rather, have a not physical product with inventory and all the headache of like returns and everything. So that was question one. Question two, in terms of B2B, I'll say that's like an ever-changing kind of method, but in the UAE specifically, it is a lot of relationship building and who you know and how you can build. So, for example, I mentioned we worked with the trade commissioners, and I actually met with the education person, and I said, hey, do you have contacts at the local Ministry of Education? Do you have, all the different emirates and entities? And they're like, yeah, we do. And I'm like, well, can we host an event with you as a partner, and can you invite all your contacts? And luckily, the guy there was like, sure, you seem credible, and you're invited here by the government. And so he actually hosted an event like by the Embassy of Canada in Abu Dhabi and invited all their local contacts. And that's where we met the Canadian private schools. I think it came across obviously really positively, being endorsed by the trade commissioner. And then we were able to get our first pilots that way. And then we kind of took that approach as a ripple effect, as every time we go back, we kind of host events or keep asking, it's a small market. And so it's easy to almost get introductions to more and more people. I think there was a question over here.
Yeah. Well, we'll get a mic down to you. Give him 1 second.
So, quick question. Is the future growth plans more so in Abu Dhabi or in Canada, North America, or in other parts of the world? Just wondering if you could speak a bit about that. Thanks.
Yeah, good question. So, up until like the last year, 95% again of our revenue was coming from the US. That's where we saw growth. We still see the majority of our leads inbound coming that way. That being said, when we think about ROI and our efforts, every time I go to the UAE, I'm closing more and more revenue. I'm getting more contracts. And from what we've heard is that, we can, the UAE is a starting point for the Middle East, but we can definitely expand beyond that once we have credible kind of case studies and contacts and contracts in that region. So that we definitely see our fastest path to growth. And then what we're noticing is that, again, internationally, mental health and well-being are becoming top of mind. And so, for example, we just saw a tender in the Philippines for a countrywide well-being kind of curriculum. We got invited to Malta for a countrywide implementation. And so we're starting to see that there's opportunities. And so we're trying to level up that we can continue to operate with the government partners so we can get more of these international opportunities. I can't remember who went. Yeah.
Is the majority of your NRR coming from private or public schools?
Majority public schools. So we find that public schools are funding, be it in the US or the UAE, they're funding their schools to pay for a program like this, whereas private schools are a little more stretched. Often they're putting money towards a psychologist or a professional versus a program or digital product like ours.
2 more questions.
I don't know, over there.
I see
I don't
a
know
couple
where the
hands
mic
up.
is.
Can we get there? I saw some hands up here.
Hey,
Can
so
we get to
I got a quick question about your background. I took a quick look at your LinkedIn. Sorry if that's a bit creepy, but I'm in sales, so just took a quick
No,
peek.
I said you can connect with me.
Yeah,
Don't
awesome.
worry.
So I know you started off in finance. You also had a background in brand management and some marketing. I was just curious to know if there was a turning point during some time 10 years ago that really pushed you to start PeekaPak and kept you going all those years, because I know you said you have a family. I know there's a lot of ups and downs, so could you speak to that a bit? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So my parents were entrepreneurs. Up until recently, they sold it. So I grew up always wanting to start my own company. But I knew, I went through numerous ideas all through, I think, university and post-university. And they were all great ideas, but I wasn't super passionate about it. And I remember seeing my parents, I'm like, my mom loves, she had a flower shop. She loves flowers. And so she was able to keep up with that for 30 years. Not that I want to do PeekaPak for 30 years, but anyway, she was able to do that for 30 years. And so I think that was a big piece of, for me, I'm like, I need to be super passionate about this. And actually, before I did my MBA at INSEAD, I actually wrote an essay. And I said, I want to start, because I was in Vietnam teaching English, and I was like, I don't want to be a teacher, but I want to be in education, I want to be in business, and I wanted to be entrepreneurial. That was what I wanted to do. It took years before I got to PeekaPak, but I had said I wanted to start a company in education, making an impact, and that would, be my goal post MBA. And so it was luckily enough that I connected with my childhood best friend. She also wanted to do something more meaningful. We were working in CPG. And as much as I was good at working in CPG, it wasn't something that I was like, wow, I love my job. I love doing this every day. And so when the idea came up and I did it, it was something that I was like, I have the means. I want to do this, and I want to make a difference. And so hopefully I'll figure this out. But I'm going to take a leap and do it. Obviously, running a company is really difficult, but it's been really rewarding at the same time.
Last question.
Hi. Yeah, you mentioned that you already pivoted from B2C to B2B. You also mentioned regarding tenders in the Philippines and elsewhere. How do you see your strategy adapting going towards the larger B2G donor-funded projects, like the large projects in this domain in Ethiopia and other places where they're supported by the World Bank, the FCDO, those kind of projects? Do you have a roadmap for that or a plan?
Yeah, so we're currently working with international consultants who are helping us identify these opportunities. And luckily, with the type of work we're doing, we're software-based. It's like we can staff up or build up when we need to in different regions. Our hope is not that we don't have to set up an entity in every region. So in the UAE, that was different. We do have an entity there. Same with the US, but majority-wise, we're able to operate from our Canadian company. We're all Canadian mostly, and I think we can staff up as we get these opportunities and tenders. But we do have a number of consultants who work with us part-time that help us identify the different opportunities and where we can focus our efforts.
Thank you, Amy. Can we get a round of applause?